In the previous lesson, we have learned how mechanical finishes can be produced on fabrics in order to improve the fabric performance. But today, we look at the chemical and additive finishes and how they are useful on the fabrics, how they are going to change the aesthetics, the texture and the body of the fabrics. Finishes that are given with the help of chemicals are termed as chemical finishes. So, these chemical finishes may alter the fabric properties by modifying maybe the surface or by altering some of the properties. But the effect of chemical finishes, it depends upon the type of chemical used and the process of actually imparting those chemical finishes on fabrics. By carefully controlling all these things, we will be able to produce many advantageous finishes onto fabrics. One of the important finishes given to all fabrics is bleaching. Bleaching is one of the preparatory steps and we have dealt with it already under preparatory finishes. And now, another finish which is very important in case of cotton is the mercerization finish. Mercerization, it is one of the important finishes that are given to cotton fabric. A calico printer in 1853 has brought in a revolutionary development by discovering this particular mercerization finish, and so it is being called after his name. He is a John Mercer, and when he was actually using one of the cotton fabrics for filtering of sodium hydroxide, he found that the fabric shrank in size and it became lustrous and good absorbent, and thus by seeing it he could perceive that definitely sodium hydroxide can produce some good effect on the cotton fabric. He showed a lot of shrinkage in that, the fabric shrank 20 to 25%, and thus the particular process was not adopted by the industry at that time. But later another scientist, Lowe, in 1897, he has come up with a process that could control the shrinkage through taking the fabric under tension. And so, since this was a wonderful finish, and so the textile industry quickly adopted this particular thing, and then the fabrics came out, especially cotton came out highly lustrous and also highly absorbent and more brighter in taking the colors and also more stronger. So, mercerization in principle is just treating the cotton fabric or maybe a cellulosic fabric with concentrated sodium hydroxide solution, and generally it is done at a lower temperatures, that means at ordinary room temperatures, and the fabric is made to actually take up the particular the action of this alkali, and in order to do so this is put up under tension. The fabric should be made to pass through a tentering frame, and so that the fabric will be set with the dimensions and it will not allow the shrinkage, and so it will be taken inside the trough where we have this sodium hydroxide, and then the fabric gets impregnated with the sodium hydroxide, and then it will be passed on through the squeeze rollers where the excess liquid will be squeezed out, and then there is a ensurety of uniform distribution of sodium hydroxide in the fabric. After treating the fabric with this, and the fabric depending upon the time for which it is given, it is left like that for some time, and then the fabric is taken out, and then it is washed properly and then neutralized with a very mild acid, so that there will not be any traces of alkali left out on the fabric, and then it is washed and dried. This is the principle of this mercerization, but in this there are some certain changes. We are saying that the luster of the fabric increases. This is because the sodium hydroxide, when it is used, it is a swelling agent, and so cotton fiber swells and it takes up the shape just like the fiber before ball opening. It is a single cell. It used to be cylindrical because cells have to be present at that time. When it swells this sodium hydroxide along with water and all, and you find that it becomes fuller, and thus the smooth surface that comes out will be highly lustrous, it shows. There are convolutions naturally in the dried cotton fiber, and so those things will also be removed because it has taken up the cylindrical shape. Those things will be removed, and also since it is under tension, what happens is the fibrils which are in a spiral form will also get oriented. It gets straightened, oriented towards the fiber axis, and thus the strength of the fiber will be improved, because all fibrils which are over there, and they all will contribute to stress that comes against, so that it will be able to show more strength in these materials. And then with this sodium hydroxide treatment, we also find that cellulose 1 turns to be cellulose 2, where there is decrystallization that occurs. Due to this, what happens is some of the hydroxyl groups will be exposed onto the surface of the material, and thus the disides will be more, and thus it can absorb more water, and also it can absorb more dyes, and thus the dyes, the fabric will become more brighter, more lustrous, more stronger, more dyeable, more absorbent. So, these are one of the some of the wonderful properties that we can see in cotton, and that is why mercerized cotton is the king. We can't get a fabric like this, is more comfortable and all, and so this is being done today in all the mills. You find this one, and whenever quality fabrics are required, mercerization has to be done. But mercerization in case of handloom materials and all, because the fabric we cannot give the finish, and so it is done at the yarn stage. So, there are two types of again mercerization. One is done at the yarn stage, second is the fabric stage. Yarn stage means the yarn is taken over the beam and between the two beams, and then it will be passed through the sodium hydroxide treatment, and then it will be made taut, so that there is a tension on that, and there will not be any shrinkage in this material. And the fabric means it is passed again under tension, by setting the dimensions, and thus it will not shrink the material at all. But if you want to bring shrinkage in this, like we need stretched fabrics and all, then in that case sometimes weft yarns are given stretch also to make lingerie and all, where the weft side we need the stretch. And so, the fabrics are exposed to slack mercerization, we call it, because the fabric is not under tension. Fabric is left like that in that particular solution, and it comes out, it shrinks, and the decrystallization occurs, it reduces strength, but it has a beautiful stretch, and which is required for some of the fabrics. And so, mercerization is one of the important finishes given to cotton fabric. For producing more variety and aesthetics in fabrics, some of the finishes are given which includes the acid. These finishes are called parchmentization finishes. In this, acid is being used in order to bring the effect of transparency, or it may be to produce some transparent and opaque designs in fabrics. In case of all over parchmentization, we find in case of organdy material and all, the fabric is exposed to something like sulfuric acid, because cotton cannot withstand all the mineral acids, and so in this the fabric is exposed to the action of the sulfuric acid for a split second, and then it will be removed and then washed thoroughly and neutralized in order to remove the traces of the acid. If it is left on the fabric will be deteriorated within few days, and so care is taken not to keep the material for a long period in that, and also that no holes appear on the material, and also lot of care needs to be taken during this finish. So, in this finish we will get the transparency in cotton fabric, because cotton fabric after dissolving gets set like a cellulosic film, and thus it becomes transparent in case of organdy and all. This is a variety, and it has a beautiful stiffness that is present. But in order to improve the stiffness and that soft supple nature of that stiffness, we need to take it through mercerization. It is better to mercerize these materials, maybe fabrics which are singed, which are bleached, and which are maybe dyed, and then mercerized and dyed, or dyed and mercerized, they pass through parchmentization process, so that the part of this cotton gets dissolved, and then only the cellulose comes out in the form of, it is set in the form of a film over there, and thus produces the transparency in organic materials. In case of localized parchmentization, this is a second method in which a fabric will be printed with a paste that resists the action of a acid. Then this particular material, after getting it dried, and then it is passed, or it is made through to pass through the acid for a split second again. And so what happens is, the portions where the paste is not there, they get exposed, and thus the cellulose film will be set over there, and then we find that those places will be transparent. And wherever the paste is there in the form of a design, that becomes opaque, because that particular paste resists the action of the acid, and thus the fabric will be opaque. And thus when it comes out, the fabric needs to be washed thoroughly and neutralized with a alkali, and then washed again and dried. And so this will produce beautiful transparent design, or transparent background to the opaque design. And so it is a variety seen in some of the fabrics available in the market. Then another type of parchmentization finish is burnt out finishes. In case when the fabrics are made out of two fabrics, like blended fabrics, and say rayon and polyester. Rayon gets distorted or gets dissolved in something like sulfuric acid, and whereas polyester stays back. Polyester resists the action of sulfuric acid. And so this blended fabric will be first of all printed with a acid resistant paste, which will resist the action of the acid in the form of predetermined design, will be imprinted on the fabric first, and then the fabric is exposed to sulfuric acid treatment for a split second. And so the rayon content in that fabric, in the areas where exposed to acid, the fiber will be removed, and then the portions will become transparent. And wherever there is a paste, those portions contain even rayon and polyester together, and nothing happens to the rayon at that particular point, and thus giving highly transparent and opaque kind of designs like you see in Brasso. Those fabrics are available in the market. We find that in the background areas are very transparent, and the design areas are opaque, and thus very good variety, very beautiful and luxurious fabrics can be made out of this parchmentization finishes. Some textural effects can also be produced in fabrics, something like creping. Creping is a finish to produce crepe-like texture on the fabric. This can be produced in many ways. Some interesting textures can be produced. Crepe means only need not be a crepe pattern, but it can be some other patterns also. It can be produced by the action of some of the chemicals like sodium hydroxide in case of cotton. When you take cotton materials, it is possible to produce materials with a shrink effect in the form of a crepe, and that is called a plissé. And these plissé effects are produced by imprinting sodium hydroxide on the fabric, and the fabric is left for some time, and if it is done in the form of a design, then the design portions where sodium hydroxide is there, they will shrink and leaving the other portions taut, so that we get the plissé effect in certain areas, so that it looks beautiful. And sometimes some seersucker effects can also be produced by imprinting the sodium hydroxide in the form of stripes. The portions where sodium hydroxide is there will shrink and become taut, and the areas where they do not shrink, those portions will pucker, and thus we get a puckered and plain stripes on the material, giving a beautiful plissé effects. And this kind of effects can also be produced on silk by imprinting the fabric with sulfuric acid and for a few seconds, and then the fabric after removing and after washing and neutralizing with the alkali and again washing and all, you find that the beautiful crepe effect is seen on the material. Another method of producing crepe is that maybe in case of thermoplastic materials. the crepe pattern can be engraved on one of the rollers, and the fabric may be made to pass through this roller and another cloth covered roller, and the engraved roller have high temperature. With this high temperature, it engraves or it impresses on the fabric the pattern, and thus the crepe pattern that comes will be temporary. Like this, sometimes even resin coated fabrics can also be given this kind of finish, and they can get the imprints on the fabrics, and thus like some leather like and things like that, different textures. In order to get interesting effects, textured effects, creping is being done to the fabrics. Additive finishes. Additive finishes are those finishes that are added onto the surface of the fabric, and it may be chemical or it may be sizing material or something like that, and they are present on the surface of the material. That is why they are called additive finishes. Most of the finishes that we see today are being applied with the help of padding and backfilling machines. Generally, these additive finishes give a different texture, body, and also stiffness to the fabrics. Coming to the padding, padding is a method of actually giving a finish to a fabric by impregnating any of the fabric with these chemicals, with these additives. So, it contains two rollers, and the fabric is made to pass between these two. Usually contain rubber rolls or the metal rolls, depending upon the purpose for which it is used, and the fabric is passed between these two rolls after impregnating into the chemical or any sizing liquid or the additive reagent that is present, and it is made to pass through that, and then it is passed through the two rollers, and so that they exert pressure on the material, remove the excess liquid, and also it will make it to go inside. That means uniformity of the finish is ensured when it is passed through the padding machine. So, this is called the workhorse of the textile industry, because most of the finishes are given by using the padding machine. Then backfilling machine is there, in which the finish is being given on only one side. In case of padding, it is given on both the sides, but here it is only on one side. The fabric with the backing will be made to pass into the chemical, and and it is impregnated only on one side, and then it is made to pass in this roller, and so that what happens is that the blanket at the back will not allow it to take up on the other side, and the finish only will come on the upper side or the face side. It may be wrong side or right side, depending upon the end use. Another finish that is applied on the material with the use of backfilling machine is called as surface coating. Surface coating is producing some kind of additive finish on one side of the fabric, usually on the right side, or depending upon the end use, it may be also present on the wrong side, like giving water repellent finishes, or by giving a smooth surface on the top. These may be coated with either rubber latex or acrylic latex or some other solutions, resins and other kind of materials, and when the fabric is passed in through this particular chemical, and in the form of a paste, it comes out, and then through the backfilling machine, it comes only on one surface of the fabric, and then it is set at a higher temperature, because latex and other things are used. It has to be finished at a higher temperature, and thus it will be set on the surface of the fabric. We have another finish called sizing. Sizing is one of the additive finishes given to cotton fabric and also rayons, because cottons and rayons are not that stiff, and so little supple and all, and so they have to be given this finish when it comes to the market, and it should be standing even for cutting and stitching also. It requires some kind of stiffness, and for that sizing is being given, and this sizing finish is something similar to starching at home, but only thing is that it contains few more materials along with starch solution. Maybe some softeners, like we have waxes, some oils, some glycerin and other things are there to act as a softener, and some fullers like something like a chalk powder or clay, and also talcum powder and all, and which acts as fullers, and so they may be used even in order to add weight to the fabric also. This is again the padding machine is used here also. The fabric is first impregnated in the sizing solution and then passes through the padding machine. And finally, you will get a machine, and it goes over a heated drum wherein it gets dried, and then the starch or the whatever additive that is being given over there, it gets set there, and the fabric comes out in the stiffness of required degree. In case of rayon fabrics, gelatin is being used as a stiffening agent because it will not interfere with the luster of the fabric. We all know that silk is having high luster, and so the lustrous is beautifully augmented by the use of gelatin there, and so that gelatin is being used for silk materials to maintain it in a proper condition. Weighting. Weighting is a special finish given to silk fabrics because silk fabrics lose their weight during degumming process. We find that around 20 to 22% of weight is being lost during degumming because gum that is present between the two filaments of a fiber needs to be removed in order to make it more lustrous, and so the fabric loses its weight. Then we all know that the fabrics are being valued or priced as per the weight it contains, and so it is a customary process in the industry to augment the weight by employing some of these metallic salts like with aluminum, iron or tin salts, and so the fabric is impregnated with it and it is left for some time in the particular chemical, so that it gains weight up to around 10%, and usually up to 10% it is allowed. It is a common practice in the textile industry, and but over that it may not be allowed except for black. Black fabrics, the weighting up to 15% is allowed, and so this weighting is important for all the fabrics because otherwise the fabric after removal of this particular gum, it becomes very flimsy, and so in order to give particular body so that it stands as it used to be, and weighting is compulsory for most of the fabrics except for the fabrics which are used for the lingerie, because we do not require that much of stiffness for those materials, and so those fabrics are not given, but the rest of the fabrics can be given, and in the trade, in the world trade, weighting is being allowed in fabrics. And for these materials, over weighting should be avoided because we know that there are many counterfeit textiles that are coming up with maybe a lot of weight in that, but if weighting is more in these fabrics, what happens is the fabric gets deteriorated, and especially when it is exposed to perspiration and all, light and also oxygen, they are exposed to for many conditions like this, the fabric gets deteriorated, and so one has to be very careful in buying these materials. And also some of these fabrics are when stored also, if you keep it in the boxes or in our almirahs, what happens is the fabrics start tearing at the folds, and thus we can identify that these fabrics are heavily weighted, and so heavy weighting should be avoided, but weighting may be almost compulsory for most of the silk fabrics in order to regain the lost weight, so that the manufacturer will not lose any money in this particular silk trade. Weighting will also increase the body of silk fabrics and absorbency of the dyes and other things, so that these weighted fabrics are more brighter in colors. Thus, chemical and additive finishes that are given to the materials will impart lot of properties to the fabrics, and the properties that are not there in the original fiber may be imparted through finishing using the chemicals or using some additives to come as a surface coating. And thus, we find that the fabrics may be become more lustrous, more stronger, and more weighted, having more body, better texture and better softness. All these things are possible, and all even aesthetic appeal is also augmented with the help of these finishes, and so they are commonly applied on fabrics, and most of these fabrics are available in the market today.